The Unending Quest for Sovereign State of Biafra, written by Douglas Anele. As an Igbo, I feel deeply about Biafra because, inter alia, although I was a toddler when hostilities broke out between Nigeria and the eastern region over 50 years ago, it is impossible to erase completely the horrendous memories of that conflict. Besides, there's hardly any family in Biafra, Igbo land particularly, that did not lose a loved one and property during the war. Personally, I lost a sister. My father's thriving merchant business in Aba and Ugwocha, Port Harcourt, was devastated, and the family barely managed to survive afterwards. Therefore, for everyone affected by the Biafran War, May 30th, 1967 is an important sense equivalent to 1939 for the Jews or Israelites who rightly have continued to commemorate the Nazi Holocaust on Jewish people during World War II. Accordingly, notwithstanding federal government's irascible attitude to the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, led by Nnamdi Kanu, only must commend the organization for instituting May 30th annually as a day of remembrance for Biafrans killed during the Civil War. A people that forgets the defining moments of its past would eventually go into oblivion. Still, you do not have to be an Igbo or belong to the defunct Eastern region to understand the significance of the very day that Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu declared the independence of Biafra from Nigeria. The new Biafra nation comprised the states in the present southeast and south-south geopolitical zones. Letters of ink have been spent by historians, academics, and other interested parties to explain both the remote and immediate causes of the war. But the truth which most members of the Sybaritic ruling class in Nigeria are stubbornly refused to take seriously is that Nigeria was created by Britain primarily to bolster our economic interests. British colonial imperialists were certainly not interested in working as equal partners with the various people they brought together for the optimum development of the country they named Nigeria. Instead, they were keen to harness the impressive human and natural resources in the new geopolitical amalgam to build a stronger and resilient economy back home as dictated by white supremacist logic and the imperatives of colonialism. This implies that continued existence of Nigeria is a clear endorsement by Nigerians of British imperialist design and their failure to outgrow the template cobbled together by Lord Lugard and the avaricious colonial establishment in the dying days of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th. Now, British colonial administrators and prominent Nigerian politicians across the country during the nationalist agitation for independence knew that forging a truly united nation from the multiple ethnic nationalities of Nigeria was a very difficult task. The most formidable was how the North, with its rustic conservative emirate system based on Islamic theocracy, could be blended seamlessly with the largely variegated Christian communities in the South. Different outcomes of indirect rule in the three major regions of Nigeria ought to have indicated to the British that Project Nigeria would be an unstoppable proposition right from the start. But they were blinded by the huge economic benefit from exploiting the country through the amalgamation of the Southern Lady of Mins and the promising well-conducted youth or Northern Nigeria. As Max Siolom, a perspective writer of Nigeria history who sometimes obscures truth in a bizarre quest for neutrality, observes, Nigeria is so ethnically, religiously, and linguistically complex that even some of its leading politicians initially doubted it could constitute a real country. I have written severally in this column about how British officials connived with conservative Muslim northern politicians to ensure that the North held onto political power at the center after independence, especially through manipulation, census figures, and elections to give northern region demographic superiority political advantage over the South. Unfortunately, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe played into the hands of both the British and the North by working hard to create a centralized Nigeria. Dr. Azikiwe's naivety stemmed from two sources. One, he thought that given the meritorious preeminent position of Indigo to key areas of the new Nigeria, the people can hold their own in a united country where merit and excellence prevailed in public life and determined who gets what at all levels of governance. 2. He envisaged that as the leading pan-Nigeria nationalist, it was more prestigious to preside over a bigger Nigerian nation than to lead a much smaller geographical space called the Eastern region. With the benefit of insight, Dr. Azikiwe was gravely mistaken to think that leading members of the northern establishment shared the same liberal democratic principles that he imbibed as an Igbo and from his studies in the United States. More specifically, Alhaji Ahmadu Bello, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and most leading northern politicians were core Muslims, and since the Quran and the Hadith are radioactive to the principles of liberal democracy, the great Zik of Africa failed to notice the perilous implication of working together with political juggernauts from the north when he entered into alliance with the Northern People Congress to form a coalition government in 1960. Let me put it this way. Muslims can deny it till the end of time, but the two most important Islamic literature unabashedly advocates an ideal authoritarian theocracy or caliphate which is incompatible with the principles of liberal democracy and human rights as they are understood today. There are accounts from few prominent Igbo and Yoruba commentators, each blaming Chief Obafemi Awolowo and Azikiwe respectively for failure of the National Council of Nigeria Citizens (NCNC) and Action Group (AG) to provide a united front at independence, which would have automatically left the NPC as in the code. The most plausible conclusion that can be distilled from this account is that the two respected politicians squandered a great opportunity because, given their solid intellectual background and liberal democratic orientation, they ought to have put aside their personal differences and worked together. That failure with the consequent unrelenting northern push for dominance despite the region's economic stagnation and yearning educational disadvantages when compared to the South can be counted as one of the remote causes of the Biafran War. The military coup of January 15, 1966 is another controversial remote cause of the conflict. A very uncharitable and distorted explanation of the unfortunate event is that it was an Igbo coup meant to launch Igbo domination of the entire country. Of course, those who make this claim are either Igbo haters or are completely ignorant of the relevant facts concerning the coup. This is deep. Well, some can agree with that, some might not be able to agree with that, but of course you really listen to all that's been said by this gentleman Douglas Anele. So I don't know what you think about what he has said, but let's take these few opinion of some individuals. Someone says Biafra 2020 must. This is the synopsis of the tragedy of Nigeria. These are already established facts. What's the way forward for Nigeria and Igbo in particular? Someone said Igbo haters, shame on you. Let my enemies live and see Biafra. Okay, audio country, where are you and where is your leader? Okay, someone says here that okay. your response is not worth responding to. So guys, let us hear your opinion and let's have your take on this particular article written by Douglas. Leave your comments respectfully and let's have your way. Thank you.